Hey everybody, Michael Walsh here. So I'm making this video because Robert Whittaker is fighting Reinier de Ridder tomorrow, and it made me reflect on Robert Whittaker's career and legacy, and the fact that I think he is very underrated by people. And not only is he underrated, it made me also think about how much Yoel Romero is underrated. Now, part of why I feel like this needs to be discussed right now is because Whittaker is nearing the end. You know, he says he wants one more shot at the title. If he beats de Ridder, he might get it. But he might lose to de Ridder, and a lot of people are picking de Ridder. I personally am picking Whittaker. I just, haven't seen enough from de Ridder to pick against Whittaker in this one. But if Whittaker does lose tomorrow, that could be it. He could just retire. So we're running out of time to talk about him while he's still relevant. And I think now is the ideal time for his legacy to be sort of re-looked at because, all the sorts of GOAT discussions we're having at the moment, people are looking much more at quality of wins and who you beat than they are looking at whether it was for a title, than they are looking at your number of title defenses. And when considering things through that lens, Whittaker suddenly starts looking much better. Because there's two real reasons that Whittaker is sort of overlooked, I think. The first is that he lost twice to Israel Adesanya, and the second is that his title reign was quite brief. Now, tackling those in reverse order, the title reign thing is kind of bullshit and not his fault, because the reason he has 0 title defenses is because he beat Romero once for the interim belt and then beat him again for, is like the inaugural vacant belt, basically, because it was after GSP retired. That whole situation was bullshit because Bisping won the belt, and that was legit. Bisping did knock out Rockhold. That was great. That was one of my favorite moments in the sport because I was a longtime Bisping fan, and everything about him coming in on short notice as the underdog, him having the, conceive, believe, achieve, shut the fuck up, and then knocking him out, and then jumping on the fence and just being like, fuck you, that was amazing. It was on the same night Cruz beat Faber, and I was a longtime Cruz fan, so I loved seeing him get another win and another title defense. I think he took it down because I think it got copyright struck, but Jack Slack made this amazing video after Bisping won, where it was just Bisping knocking out Rockhold in slow motion while the theme from Chariots of Fire played, and then after the knockout and him on the fence celebrating, it just fades into the Union Jack, the British flag, waving in the wind, and it was just, everything about it was amazing. So I liked that Bisping got the belt. However, we of course know that he had 2 totally bullshit title defenses, the second of which he lost, but he fought Henderson in a rematch, barely beat him, fought GSP, lost to him, and then GSP vacates. During that whole stretch, we all knew that Whittaker and Romero were the 2 best middleweights. We got to see Romero knock out Rockhold, so we know he could have just done that when Bisping did it. But just everyone with eyes knew that they were the real best fighters. In the first fight, Whittaker beats Romero. Bisping's in the audience. There's lip service paid to the idea that he would fight the winner of that fight. Of course, he never did. For the good of him, honestly. I mean, if he was ever going to lose his second eye, it would be against one of those guys. But at any point, Whittaker was getting screwed over by that whole situation. It's not the exact same thing, but it's analogous to Tom Aspinall defending an interim belt while John Jones fucks around and doesn't fight and then fights Stipe, and that whole situation is somewhat analogous to Whittaker's title reign. So that shouldn't be a big strike against him. Now, to the first problem, the fact that Israel Adesanya overshadows Whittaker because he beat him twice and had this long, relatively long streak of defenses with 5 overall. There's a few things about that. One, the rematch was incredibly close. A lot of people think Whittaker won. And sure, even if he did win, even if you feel that way, you still kind of look more favorably at Silva, or at Israel, because Israel wins the first fight decisively by knockout, and then they have a neck-and-neck decision that could have gone either way. So, who got the better of that? It was Israel. But But at any rate, like, if you look at everyone else, if you just kind of table their two fights, they fought almost entirely the same roster of people. Like, they both fought Costa, they both fought Romero, they both fought Cannonier, they both fought Kelvin Gastelum, they both fought Vittori, they both fought Derek Brunson, they both fought Brad Tavares. Like, they have almost identical resumes, you know, with a few exceptions. Like, Israel beat Anderson Silva, he also beat Alex Pereira, but he also lost to him. But Whittaker just never fought him. And Whittaker beat Darren Till, and he beat Jacare Souza. And the Jacare Souza win is very good. Granted, it was an aging Jacare. I think he was like 37. But he still, you know, he had that giant win streak, should have fought for the belt. Never got the shot. Lost a split decision to Romero, did Jacare. Won 2 more fights after that, and then lost to Whittaker. So it's like, that was still a very, well past his prime, that was still a very capable Jacare. And Whittaker had to show that he was still, or he had to show his ability to deal with Jacare's strengths, because Jacare did get on his back, and Whittaker did have to show that he had great takedown defense, great grappling defense, submission defense, and so on. So that is a great win. That's a win Israel does not have. Kind of like the Pereira win's a great win that Whittaker doesn't have. But, and then aside from that, they also lost to some of the same people, right? Because, well, one of the same people. Because they both lost to Dricus, and then Israel has his loss to Imanov, and he has his loss to, Strickland, whom Whittaker never fought. But Whittaker has his loss to Khamzat, so, you know. And they both have losses in other weight classes. Israel lost against Jan Blachowicz, and Whittaker has his losses at welterweight, you know, the last one being against Stephen Thompson. So those things are what they are. But on the whole, their resumes are incredibly comparable. And a big thing that gives Whittaker's resume a bit of an edge is the Romero fights. Because yes, they both beat Romero, but Whittaker beat a better version of Romero twice. So Romero is sort of like a Randy Couture or like a Dan Henderson or like a Daniel Cormier, where he had a whole wrestling career and then started MMA very late. So even though Romero still somehow managed to seem more athletic than every other fighter in the sport, he was still an old man. Like, he was 40 years old in the first Whittaker fight. And, 41 or 42 in the second one, and then older still in the Israel fight, because he lost to Whittaker in the rematch, lost to Costa, and then fought Israel. So you watched over the course of that, from the first Whittaker fight to the Israel fight, you watched a decline of Yoel Romero. Because when you're that old, you're just aging like that. You're aging day to day. And we saw that. In the first fight with Whittaker, Romero is still a wrestler. He's still trying to implement his wrestling over Whittaker. And Whittaker has to show that he has some of the greatest takedown defense and get-ups we've seen. He had to actually show that against Romero. And after that fight, going into the Luke fight and then into the Whittaker rematch, that's where we saw the shift where Romero just completely abandons his wrestling and becomes I'm going to stand here and block everything and conserve energy and then try to take your head off in the third round. That's where that transition truly happened. He always had third round finishes, but that transition to a completely defensive, exclusively striker, essentially, happened after the first Whittaker fight. And then by the time he gets to the Israel fight, Romero is old enough that you can just tell he has so little ability to maintain his energy that he just couldn't chase the finish like he could even in the Whittaker rematch. And sure, some of that is to do with how Israel fought him, because Israel eats a right hand in the first round that you can tell stings him, and you can tell he doesn't want to eat again. And Israel proceeds to just play a nullification game. Play a game where neither of them get hurt, where he just stays at range, feints and picks at him with low kicks, and just tries to not offer him any chances to leap at him. And Romero is old enough that he's not able to really push the issue unless he's really given the opportunity. And so it goes to an incredibly boring decision. So while Israel Adesanya has a win over Romero, it doesn't count nearly as much to me as Whittaker's 2 wins over Romero. So all of a sudden, that might even tip the resume in favor aside from their fights with each other, which again, the rematch arguably goes to Whittaker, that kind of almost tips the resume, in favor of Whittaker for me. And I still, sure, I still wouldn't rank him ahead of Israel. If we were making a GOAT list or if we were making an all-time middleweight list, I would still have Israel ahead of him, but it's very narrow in my book. And if Whittaker is able to gain the belt back, then he eclipses Israel to me. Like if Whittaker can beat DeRitter and then beat like Dricus in a rematch, then he's the better man than Israel in my book. Now where Romero is underrated, because Romero was never the champion, but again, we're in this kind of new era where we're looking at quality of wins, not whether you won the belt or defended the belt. Like Romero had an insane stretch of wins leading up to and then in between the two Whittaker fights, because he beat Tim Kennedy, he beat Jacare Souza, he beat Lyoto Machida, he beat Chris Weidman, and he beat Luke Rockhold. And aside from Souza, he knocked out all of them. And let's compare that to Dricus du Plessis, because everyone now is considering Dricus to be the best middleweight of all time because of his quality of wins. And some people are putting him top 20, top 15 GOAT of all time. Some people are saying if he beats Khamzat, he'll be a top 6, top 5 all time. And that to me is excessive. I'm not sure I can get on board with any of that. But like it's all hanging on this stretch of wins he has, right? Which is over Whittaker, over Strickland twice, and over Israel. Now, that's not actually much of a better streak of wins than those 5 wins of Romero. Because bear in mind, like, only one of the guys Strickland beat was the champion. It was Strickland. And then it was former champions, right? It's former champion Robert Whittaker, former champion Israel Adesanya, then former champion Strickland. And Israel was clearly past it when Dricus beat him because he was like 35 already. Strickland is now 34 years old, so he's starting to get past it. He wasn't in the first fight, but like, and even Whittaker was 32 when Dricus beat him, but that's an old 32. Like Whittaker had already been fighting for 14 or 15 years when he fought Dricus. That's a lot of damage. That's a lot of miles on the clock, and he's a guy who's expressed how that affects him. Like Whittaker, one of the things I love and respect about him is that he is like a consummate martial artist. Like he trains all the different disciplines and he competes in different disciplines. Like he competes in jiu-jitsu, in the gi. He competes in wrestling. I believe he was a national champion wrestler in Australia. I believe he represented Australia in the Commonwealth Games. He trains with pro boxers. Like he's a legitimate martial artist. He's got black belts in traditional martial arts like Hapkido. Like he's a lifelong martial artist. He's also an incredibly hard worker, and you see that in his endurance that he demonstrates in his fights, but like you hear about it anecdotally as well, but you also hear about how it wears on him. Like he, during some fight, some phase during his post-championship career, Whittaker lamented how, and he took some time off. I believe this might have even been after the Dricus fight that he was talking about all this, but I can't remember exactly. But he talked about how he had this kind of light bulb moment where he was doing hill sprints on Christmas Day, and he finished the workout and he was just like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? Like, why am I still doing this? Why am I still doing this to myself? Like, what's the point? And that's the effect that fighting at the top for that long has on you. It's not just about how young you are, because there's a difference between that and when you're just full of vigor and energy and piss and vinegar because you're like streaking and you're on your way to a title shot, or you just won the belt and you're on top of the world. Like, that's where you can argue if he's truly past his prime or not, but there's a sense in which it's kind of obvious, I think, that the Whittaker Dricus beat is not the Whittaker that Israel beat. You know what I mean? So it's like, you look then, so you take then that streak of wins Dricus has, the only guy clearly in his prime is like the first Strickland fight. And now you compare that to the Romero wins, which again, he never beat a sitting champion, but look at all those guys he beat. Tim Kennedy is very underrated. I know he's in hot water now because of his stolen valor controversies, and yeah, fuck him. But he was a very good fighter, and I've mentioned this before, but I've heard him compared to Chael Sonnen, basically saying he was the better Chael Sonnen who got less credit. And there's an argument there. I mean, just look at, he beat Bisping more decisively than Sonnen did, for example. But he was a legit fighter. He, fought for the belt in Strikeforce. He was a legit, top dude. Jacare, Strikeforce champion, should have gotten the shot at the UFC belt, never got it, but should have. Jacare beat Weidman, who was UFC champion at a time when Jacare was champion in Strikeforce. So Romero beats him. He beats Weidman, again, former champion, former UFC champion. He beats Lyoto Machida, former UFC champion. And Machida was doing very well at the time at middleweight. He'd beaten Musashi, he'd beaten Munoz. Like, he was looking very good. And he beats Luke Rockhold, Romero does. And Luke Rockhold, again, former UFC champion, former Strikeforce champion. Like, that is a stretch of wins comparable to Dricus's. And yeah, I'd still put Dricus's slightly higher because there are ultimately better names on it. And in both cases, it's mostly former champions, not sitting ones. So complaining about some of Dricus's wins being a little past their sell-by date applies to Romero's as well. But nevertheless, those are very neck and neck streaks. So if you're gonna insist that Dricus is like top 15 all time, then where the fuck is Romero? He's got to be close. He's got to be pretty fucking close, right? Especially he should get more credit as well because he did it when he was old. You can't call that his prime. It might be his best years as a fighter, but it's not his actual prime. His actual prime was lost to the Olympic Games. So, and this isn't to dog on Dricus because I really like Dricus and I'm going to make a video about him as his fight with Khamzat draws nearer because I'm quite high on Dricus at the moment. And I think if Dricus beats Khamzat, that does change things. That's going to really affect where I look at him as an all-time middleweight. We'll see if that does anything for if he would crack like a top 20 GOAT list for me or something. But as an all-time middleweight, that's going to do a lot for me if he can beat Khamzat. So, this isn't I'm not hating on Dricus. I actually really like watching Dricus. But it's a thing where you can't be having Dricus and Israel so high and then just leave Whittaker and Romero to the wayside. See what I'm saying? And this feels like, very timely to me because we just had Dustin Poirier retire after losing to Holloway. And Poirier is a comparable figure to Whittaker. Poirier never even won the belt. He won the interim belt, and it was kind of around the time, I can't remember exactly if, because Khabib was out for some reason, if I recall, because that's why there was the interim belt with Holloway in the first place. And you could argue that, I heard someone make the argument recently that he should have actually been stripped, Khabib, in which case that Holloway fight would have been for a vacant belt, in which case Poirier would have been an official champion, but he would still suffer from the fact that you just knew Khabib was around and that he wasn't the best lightweight. And, you could say that he's comparable to Whittaker, because you could argue that Whittaker, ultimately not the better man against Israel. You could argue Whittaker would probably lose to Pereira. You can make that argument. You can argue that Dricus was just always going to beat him. You could argue that someone like Khamzat was just always going to beat him. So that's a big career of having people on top of you for most of your time. He almost lost to Romero in the rematch. I was in Chicago for the Romero rematch. I saw that live and was just blown away. Watching Yoel Romero move in person is insane. I've never seen a human being move like him. And that fight was incredibly close. You could have scored it a draw if you want to give Romero a 10-8 in the third. You could score it for Whittaker. Scoring it for Romero would be difficult, but nevertheless, it was a split decision. And, you kind of left it feeling like Romero won because he did all it, the lion's share of the damage, and it's not being scored by Pride judging criteria, but if it were, Yoel would have won, kind of like Volk versus Islam. But in any case, I've completely lost my train of thought. But anyways, comparing Whittaker to Poirier, Poirier also was, never the best lightweight, right? There was always Khabib, there was, then Oliveira, Islam, both guys fought a murderer's row. Both guys were fan favorites. Both guys put out consistently exciting fights. You know, Dustin more so. Whittaker had a boring fight here and there against guys like Till and Israel, although I blame those two for that more than anything. Those guys have many boring fights. Whittaker has incredibly few. But, you know, and I would consider Poirier ahead of Whittaker on a GOAT list because he's doing it in the harder divisions. He's doing it at featherweight and lightweight, you know, not middleweight. But again, it's like I'm seeing people put Poirier in their top 20. So again, it's like, well, Whittaker should be not that far behind, right? Just like if you have Dricus in your top 15, Romero should not be that far behind, right? So, you know, so all of this is to say that, you know, we're nearing the end of an era. Israel Adesanya is basically gone. Yoel Romero is effectively retired. Whittaker is either about to have his last run or is about to retire. And, you know, I'm really looking forward to the new era. I'm looking forward to Dricus's reign or Khamzat if Khamzat wins. But, you know, I thought it was important to give Whittaker his flowers here because he is one of my favorite fighters. You know, I like everyone loves him. You know, as a personality, as a family man, people love him. You know, he's a gamer. You know, people love that. You know, again, he is very comparable to Dustin Poirier in a lot of ways. And we just saw Poirier retire, and people were correctly giving him his flowers about that. I mean, I just made a video about how that fight, you know, hurt Max's legacy, hurt Volk's legacy. You know, Poirier's the man. But I thought it was necessary to take a moment and shout out both Robert Whittaker and Yoel Romero because those guys, you know, it kind of reminds me of Demetrius Johnson and Henry Cejudo. You know, because Demetrius, obviously, long-reigning champ, you know, some people consider him the GOAT. I rank him very highly. Cejudo, double champ, you know, they have that very close second fight. It goes to Cejudo, but it's neck and neck. They both look like just two of the best fighters to ever live in that fight. And that's like the end of an era. And now we're in the post era of that, where it's the Brandon Morenos, it's the Figueiredos, it's Pantoja, and that's a great era too. Pantoja is one of my favorite fighters. Figueiredo is one of my favorite fighters. You know, I put Figueiredo as 19 on my GOAT list. But like, you know, it's important to remember what it was like when Demetrius Johnson and Henry Cejudo were the top two flyweights. And similarly, it's important to remember what it was like when Robert Whittaker and Yoel Romero were the two top middleweights, you know. And I think thinking back on that and really acknowledging it and cherishing it, you know, makes it even sweeter than when we can look forward and say, and now we're in the Dricus Khamzat era. And what a time to be alive.